Yo, book nerds! I finished reading Little Men by Louisa May Alcott, which is the sequel to Little Women. I have to say overall, I did enjoy this book. It was obviously nothing compared to Little Women. I love Little Women, but it was still very entertaining. I was expecting to have years go by during this book, just as in Little Women. In Little Women, you're with these girls for years. You watch them grow up. And so that's kind of what I was expecting with this book, with these little men. But it's actually just basically one summer and a little into fall. So that was a little different. But basically, this book is about Jo as an adult, and she has a school for boys. And it's about these boys that she and her husband teach and try to raise. And there is a lot of boys. There's like 12 kids at this school. There's 2 girls, but the rest are boys. And I think Louisa May Alcott does a great job of making each character their own individual person. And I thought she did that really well in Little Women too. So every character feels uniquely their own. They have their own ambitions, their own goals. They don't just all blend together. So that's really nice because when you have that many characters, it can be hard to keep them all straight, especially if characters are too similar to each other. So I really liked that each character is their own individual person, has their own individual things that make them tick. This is definitely a moral book, just like Little Women. Each chapter basically is its own little life lesson. Something happens and then we have to work our way through whatever happens, and then there's some kind of moral at the end of why life should be lived a certain way or why you should believe in certain things, etc., etc. So it's definitely a moral story. The few girls that are in this story are pretty much mini versions of the girls that are in Little Women. So there are 2 girls that live at the school, and then there's another girl that visits a little bit. So 2 girls that live there, 3 girls overall that are like the main girls that we talk about. Nan is like the mini version of Jo. She is wild, she's a tomboy, she is very independent, and so Jo really connects with Nan because she sees herself in her. And then we have Daisy, who is Meg's daughter, and she is a very domestic type of girl. She's not very wild, she's a girly girl, and she's very similar to Meg and kind of Beth in that sense. And those are the 2 girls that live at the school. And then we have Bess, who comes to visit, and Bess is Amy's daughter, and Bess is just mini Amy all the way. She's very prim and proper and elegant and definitely just like her mom. And I think that that's kind of interesting to have these girls be like little mini versions of what we had in Little Women, because especially for Bess and Daisy, since they are Meg and Amy's children, as a mom, it's very true that your children can be little mini versions of yourself. I see things in my daughter that's like, that is me. She is a little version of me. And so I find that very fascinating and relatable. And they still manage to feel like their own characters, even though they are mini versions of these older women. And so I don't think Alcott was just recycling characters. I think she did it in a very deliberate way, and I really liked it. I thought it was successful. Now when it comes to the boys, like, it did take me a little bit of time to get into this story, just because I feel like everything was so perfect, and because it's a moral story, I guess that kind of makes sense. It just seems like everything flows so well, and yeah, things go wrong, but they're smoothed over super quickly, and so sometimes I felt like, especially for having so many children, things just went well too often. And so as a parent, it's like, okay, life is not that easy, but it was still enjoyable. But I have to say that my favorite boy character is Dan. And I'm going to talk about Dan a little bit, so if you don't want any spoilers, then jump ahead in the video. But everything seemed to be going so well for this little school that Joe is running until Dan shows up. And so I was kind of like reading really slowly through the first few chapters, and then Dan shows up, and then I was hooked into this book. Dan is a mischievous, rebellious, naughty child. He's, I believe he's 14 if I remember right. I'm not gonna look, but he's somewhere around 14. So he's an older child, but he gets into trouble all the time. He gets the other boys into trouble. He starts fights with other boys, like physical fighting. He leads the boys to maltreat some animals. So if you're sensitive to that kind of thing, beware. It's not very graphic, and the animals are okay in the end, but that is in there. And so Dan like really comes in and just shakes everything up, and Joe is determined to help him and refine him and make him a good man. And it's a battle. And so I was hooked once Dan showed up on the scene. Because until Dan shows up, it's just too nice. Everything's just too nice. And so I needed some spice thrown in, and that's what he was. And then Dan does leave Plumfield. That's the name of the school. He does leave for a while. And so then I was kind of sad because I was like, no, like the reason that I'm enjoying this book just left. And so now what? But he does come back. So that made me happy when he returns again. I love watching Dan's progress because he definitely pushes back against any kind of change in him and any kind of authority. But eventually, like, love wins out. Joe loves him and cares for him. And eventually Dan comes to appreciate that and tries harder. And I feel like his redemption is very believable. And it's not perfect. He does still make mistakes. He does still fall back into his old ways. And it's a constant battle for him to try to be good. And I really enjoyed his storyline. It was my favorite storyline of all of the characters in this book. So overall, I did think this book was worth reading. I did enjoy it. I don't think that it's better than Little Women. Little Women is just amazing. But it definitely didn't fall flat for me. I enjoyed it. And I think if you like Little Women, you should give this one a shot too. If you've read Little Men, let me know your thoughts in the comments, whether you agree or disagree with me. So I have started Joe's Boys now, which is the third and final book in this series. I've only read one chapter. I'm on chapter 2. So I have no comments at this point on this one. This book takes place 10 years after the events in Little Men. So we're still following Joe and some of the boys that were in Little Men. So I'm interested to see what happens with them. That's all for me this week, kind of a shorter video. School has started again, so things are getting busy again. I'm still working part-time at the church. I'm still just trying to get into a new rhythm with everything. But it's all good things, and I'm healthy, baby is healthy, and the rest of my family is healthy. So like life is good. It's just busy right now. I hope you guys have had a really great January. I will talk to you guys next Monday. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thanks for talking books with me.